Welcome to the Ship Happens podcast, a podcast about construction, education, and everything in between. I am your host, Joseph Garibaldi, and I invite you to take a listen to a new and exciting podcast about construction and teaching. Thank you guys. Welcome back to the Ship Happens podcast. This is Joseph Garibaldi, back with episode 4. Kind of crazy, I'm already on 4. I mean, maybe one day I'll be on like 100 and I'll look back and think about how stupid I was, but we're back here. Now, I want to forgive you, my voice may sound a little weird. I live in the Central Valley, and during this time, I don't know if you're listening to this, how the fires look, but we have the creek fire that is just maybe about northeast of us, and all the smoke is settling down in this valley, so it's kind of been wrecking the way my voice sounds, like my the mucus in my throat. It's all crazy. But anyways, today I want to talk about project creation. What does that creative process look like? How I get to be creative and how I get students to become creative, and lastly, how to get students to be creative online. So making projects is an incredibly creative process, meaning that making a project has to be something worthwhile and something that potentially will teach a skill and hopefully is worth a little bit of money. Now, I learned from my master teacher, student teaching, he always had a little joke he told students. He always said, chicks dig custom. Then he'll follow up with, well, guys did custom too, because that's why they lift their trucks. And I always really laughed about that because it's really true. Everyone likes custom made things. So in keeping with that theme, I try to custom make a bunch of projects. Now, the first couple of projects are your standard birdhouse, your basic projects that you will find online. When we start getting further into the year, I really try to create custom projects, and eventually my second year students will create their own custom projects as time goes on. Now, what does that creative process look like? The idea is to find something that you want to build, whether it be a desk, whether it be a stool, could be a house, right? You need to have some basic idea of something that you want to build. So what do? I look at projects and I look at what I have, I look at the material I have, and I say, what do I want to build today? If I'm dealing with cedar fence planks and I want to create something out of it, I go back and forth on what I can build out of that plank. One of the projects I drew out was a planter box. Now, this project has definitely been built before, so it's not completely custom, but the plans are completely custom. The steps are completely custom because I drew out those steps and those plans to put my own kind of spin on it. So it's all about having an idea and following through. Getting students to be creative and to tap into their creative mind is a pretty, I wouldn't say difficult process, but it's not the easiest. Like a lot of students naturally are creative, but a vast majority of students don't understand or haven't tapped into that creative muscle in their brain. So what do? Well, first they need to know how to lay out a project anyways. They need to know and understand measurements and layout. So we focus very heavily on laying out projects. We focus very heavily on being able to measure to a 16th of an inch. Now, I don't know where that drop off was. I remember learning an analog clock. I remember learning how to write in cursive. I remember learning rulers and all the different measurements. But kids today, they don't learn those types of measurements, right? Or if they do, it's only taught once or twice or for a year and then it's forgotten. So it's up to me to teach those measurements again. So we have a measurement board that we race with, we do activities, we measure a shop, we start doing that sort of thing. The first year is linear measurements. We just measure lines. We don't do anything crazy, right? We learn how to read a ruler, a tape measure. We learn the tricks that you can use on a tape measure, that sort of thing. The second year gets a little bit crazy. We're off of the linear stuff, but now we're starting to move into squares, measuring the area of a square, measuring the area of a rectangle, measuring the area of hard to reach or random spots. And that's important when you're trying to figure out how much land you have or how much grass you need to put in, or even hardwood flooring, the square footage of a house or a room. The third year is when we get a little bit more in-depth and crazy. We start learning about 3D or three-dimensional shapes. This is important when ordering concrete. You need to know how many cubic feet or cubic yards of material you need. This is really important for figuring out how much stone or gravel you need in a particular area or place. Because now we need to figure out, okay, what square footage is going to take, but how high is it going to be too? What is the thickness of whatever you're putting down? So we focus very heavily on those kinds of measurements. Once students understand those measurements, then they're able to start at least mapping out a project. But it doesn't stop there. Project layout and creation go hand in hand. So in order to kind of tap into that creative muscle, we watch a ton of YouTube videos. Now, we've all seen those, they're called makers, right? We've all seen those maker YouTube channels where they make a lot of epoxy-based projects, I find. They're going to make a table out of a live edge piece of wood, but they're going to dip it all in epoxy. Now, I'm not knocking those who make maker videos. I just don't feel like it teaches you anything. It's really cool to watch people make something, but it's different because they're not telling you how they make it. So what I make my kids do is I make them write each step of a maker's video. I'm doing the hard work for these videos. They're writing and they're tracking each step and what each tool he uses are. This is important because if they're going to write steps for their own custom-based projects, they need to know what tools they need to use. They need to know what steps they also need to have in order to get to their finished project. The hard part comes with encouraging kids, pushing kids to be creative. That's the hard part. In fact, I want kids to be creative. I want kids to create new and exciting projects. But how do we do that? After watching videos, it's up for the kids to pick something they want to make and design it. A really common one is a desk or a dining room table. Something that's square, that has 4 legs. Still challenging to make it level, right? Still a challenging project to build in its own right. But their task is to map out and draw out their own custom desk or table. And it's nothing fancy. There's no drawers or anything in it. There's no cabinetry built into the desk. It's just a desk. But watching kids design and seeing their design flaws is a incredible experience for me because it also helps me understand, okay, this is what they're getting from these particular videos. This is what they're getting from this project. How can I twist or maneuver my thinking to adapt to what they're soaking in, to what they're getting in? I'll give you a little bit of an example. I had a student who really wanted me to build him a desk. And I said, you know what? Instead of building you a desk, why don't you build it, right? Why don't you draw out some plans? We'll look through them together and I'll help you with that creative process. So he drew out plans for a desk. The plans are actually really nice, right? The desk looked good in theory. It had a cabinet built in with some drawers. I believe he had 3 drawers on it. And everything looked really nice and drawn out. But the problem is that his measurements didn't add up. One side of the desk was longer than the other side. So that would make his desk look like almost like a triangle. It would have an angle in the back. While this might be the theme or the aesthetic you're going for, I could tell just on his face as I was explaining it that he didn't understand and that definitely was not the plan or the aesthetic he was trying to achieve. So we focus more on making it square. It's almost as important as features in your plan, because the problem would be if you were to try to put cabinets on his desk for drawers or whatever, it would not fit right. It wouldn't be square, so the drawer wouldn't be able to set right in the desk and it would look kind of wonky and weird. So we had to fix his desk. I typically start when I make a desk or something like a desk, I typically start with drawing the top slab. What do I want my desk dimensions to be? The top of the desk is the most used part of the desk, obviously. So what do I want the top to be? I gotta measure out the space I have, gotta measure out the area that I have available to make my desk fit in that particular area. Remember, it's custom. After I do that, then I focus on the legs. Okay, how high do I want my desk to be now? Do I want to be like fancy and put in, little hydraulic pistons or cylinders that lift up my desk to make it a standing desk? Do I have the height available for a standing desk? What do I have available, or what do I have in terms of how much room I need or how much room it's going to take up? After I figure out the height, the width, and the length of the desk, I focus very heavily on any kind of features I want. The desk I have in my office that I'm recording on right now has 2 drawers, and it has a longer middle drawer that a keyboard would go into, but it was changed into a regular storage drawer for pens and stuff. I actually really like this desk. If I were to build a desk again, then I would focus on the cabinetry that goes underneath the desk. Do I want drawers? Absolutely. How many drawers do I want? How big do I want my drawers to be? Does the desk need to accommodate a chair, right? If it accommodates a chair, then I may need to go back to my height and work on the height. But you want to figure out length and width first, then height, then your accessories. I built a desk a while back where I routed grooves inside the desk and I put LED lights inside the desk. So when you got to the desk, you can turn on the lights and it would light up the area around the desk. Very gimmicky, but also very custom. So how do I make kids think about that? Well, it comes down to watching videos and learning from mistakes and failures. We learn how to lay out certain things. But just like putting a Lego together, you don't put parts in that, you don't skip steps, I should say. I'm sorry. You don't skip steps. You place the brick wherever it needs to go, and you do not skip any steps. Just like with building a desk, I can't just put the cabinets in before putting my legs on the table. Just doesn't work. So back to my students. In terms of the student with a desk, he has a fantastic desk now. I think his desk turned out fantastic. We worked worked through it together, and he built a solid project. But the deal is that not all students get that. Some students still go through and build the project the way they think is the right way. And you know what? That's okay. I know the project is going to turn out with mistakes, but it's all about learning from those mistakes. If they didn't have me, they would be frustrated and not know how to fix their mistakes. So when they make a mistake, we work through it together, and I ask them a very simple question. Okay, what went wrong and how can we make it better? What can we do differently that changes our table? And then, since we already built this table, how can we make this table better? One of the most common things is that the legs are never cut the same length. So how can you make it better? Personally, I can cut a little shim and put it underneath, but then you would have a little bit of a difference, right? Either a line at best case scenario or a big gap because you didn't cut it right is the worst case scenario. So how can you fill that? Well, you could technically fill in that gap with some glue or some wood filler, sand it, and then you would still have a little bit of a line or awkward transition. So we would paint that, right? Because paint will cover up the wood grains and you won't be able to see too many of the hard or rough places where you had to fix your mistakes. If you want a natural wooden desk, it is that much important to measure twice and cut once. I don't know if I should share the story, but I think I'm going to, because that is the importance of measure twice, cut once. I had a master teacher. This is a different one. And if you're listening to this, I apologize. I had a master teacher who was building a door for his house. I don't know if it was a bathroom door, an office door, a barn door, or whatever, but it was supposed to look like a barn door. It was supposed to be rustic. It was made with shiplap. It looked like a really great door. Well, he had to put a handle in the door. Typically, when you're trying to do something that precise, you don't want to use the edge of the ruler. You don't want to start at 0. You want to start at 1 inch and then measure in, because it's a little bit more accurate. We don't know how much the tip of the tape measure is worn out, so we use 1 and we measure in. Well, if you use 1 and measure in, you have to add 1 inch to all your measurements because you started at 1 inch. Well, we're measuring. We start. I take the tape measure and I place it on the correct line so he gets the same exact mark. He tells me, no, remember we started at 1 inch. We have to add 1 inch. I was very confused because I also started this new measurement at 1 inch. So that would make it the same as the first measurement we did. But he started at 2 inches. So now it's 2 inches off. He puts the jig to cut out the handle for the door, places it on, goes to cut, and cuts the handle 1 inch away from where it should be. That may not seem like a big deal, but the actual mechanism inside the door that you actually turn and unlocks the door, that didn't even stick out of the door because it needed that extra inch to stick out of the door to fit inside the door frame. Well, so you can imagine how frustrating of a situation that would be. I was told to go home. I'm assuming I was sent home to so he can ponder how to fix the mistake that happened on the project. But that's how important it is. If you're building a custom project, it's very important to get it right, especially if you're doing any sort of cutting. Any sort of cutting, you have to get it right. I don't care how many times you measure, what measurement technique you use, you have to get it right. So, how do I make kids become creative online? We talked about becoming creative, watching videos, drawing out projects. How do we make them creative online? Well, it's quite simple. We actually teach the same way. In fact, we're not face to face, but we can still show them videos, we can still have them map out projects, and we can still have them design projects. If you're teaching a welding class or a metal class, I would recommend having your kids get on Fusion 360. It is a CAD-based program, but you can actually design projects. You can design projects online, 3D, and create things, and create a step-by-step cut list as well for those projects. My big gripe with Fusion 360 is that it's really not optimized for woodworking. It is very well optimized for metalwork and that sort of thing. But woodworking, it's not super optimized for. So I found a program called SketchUp. SketchUp is free for hobbyists, and you just have a student register as a hobbyist. That program is way more tuned in for woodworking. Now, it's not exactly like Fusion 360, but it's close, right? It's for woodworking. It's for that project creation. So having students create projects online digitally is a great skill. I've gone back and forth with that personally. If I can take a little aside here, I come from a family who has done construction, who has done concrete, tile, carpentry, contractor work, and I grew up around hand-drawn plans. In fact, my grandfather still has all of his original plans for his concrete business that he did back in the 60s and 70s. My grandfather, if you ever go to Stanford University, if you ever been there, if you ever been to the hospital, that concrete that you see there was laid by my grandfather. He still has the original plans for Stanford for the concrete that he laid there. My dad used to tile different places. One of the more famous places he tiled was in San Jose. Coca-Cola used to have a bottling factory in San Jose. Before they shipped Coca-Cola out elsewhere, there used to be one in California. My dad was contracted to tile that facility. All Coca-Cola facility had to be tiled. The reason why is it was easier to clean clean up the syrup and other spills that are inevitably going to happen in a soda plant. My dad still has the original plans for his tile on the Coca-Cola company. It is safe to say I grew up around drawn out, hand-drawn plans. In fact, if someone asked me to build them a project, I'm currently building a coffee bar right now for a teacher, there's a good chance I'm going to hand draw the project and hand them a hand drawing within a few hours. The problem with Fusion 360, the problem with SketchUp is that instead of getting plans to a person within an hour or two, it's going to take me 2 days. Now, the plans are definitely going to look more professional. The plans are definitely going to look more clean cut, and it's definitely going to make a better impression. However, they have my plan and my quote first. And I think that's incredible. I think that's probably the best reason to be good at hand-drawn plans. I don't want to knock Fusion 360 or SketchUp. There is a market and there are people who are incredible at it and do things extremely quickly using SketchUp or Fusion 360. I am not one of those people, right? I've tried to learn. I've tried to invest time in it. It's just CAD is not my thing. So I draw hand-drawn plans. And I've had people ask me, well, who's going to get the job? You or the person using Fusion 360 or SketchUp, a CAD program? And I said, you know what? It's proven that typically the first quote you get is going to be considered more for a job than the middle or last quote you get. People are very eager and anxious to get stuff done quickly, but also get stuff done right and good the first time. If you can give them a hand-drawn plan that has everything they need, that looks good, not only will it show that you are passionate in your work, but it will also show that you're quick and you care about them as a customer, that you're not going to make them wait any longer than they have to. You can get them a plan, a quote as soon as possible. In a few episodes, I'm going to talk about invoicing customers, and we're going to talk pretty heavily about how I go about invoicing and how I do estimates, that sort of thing. Estimates are so important, and it has its own episode dedicated to it. My dad would go out on tons of estimate jobs and just give people estimates for a job that they want done. But coming back to creation, if we're going online, this is the perfect time for students to learn Fusion 360. It is a perfect time for kids to learn SketchUp. It is a perfect time for kids to learn how to digitally design projects quickly. If you can get the project in a day, if you can get everything planned out in a quote in a day, you will have a great chance of getting that job. My dad would schedule his day around different sort of estimates. He would do 5 estimates in a day and get those estimates back out in the order that he took the estimate in the next day. It was a lot of time, but he would get 3 out of those 5 estimates. That's all you really need. But if a student does digital estimates or digital project plans or digital pictures or drawings of whatever kind of job needs to be created, it's going to look good, and if they can get done fast, it's going to look even better on them because they care about their customers' time. So making students or having students be creative online is almost like the same process. We teach measurement, they measure their house, they measure their yard, they measure their room, and then we work on project layout. We watch videos, we lay out projects online, we lay out the steps of a project, we lay out the procedures, we lay out the materials, we lay out the tools. Then they work on their own project layout. If that's going to be on SketchUp or if that's going to be on paper that they take a picture of and submit it online, it's whatever they feel like or whatever they feel comfortable with. But I push more to learn how to use these tools that are becoming more popular or more common every single day. In fact, most of the plans I get, I'm going to give him a shout out. Steve from Woodworking for Mere Mortals is like a role model for me. And I use most of his plans for my kids to build, right? I use some of his projects, and most of his projects that are entry level, I use those projects for kids to build. And I think he does a great job at explaining everything, explaining what you need to know versus what is nice to know. He hasn't really cut any corners, and his projects are all done via SketchUp, and they're fantastic. They are absolutely fantastic. I would recommend, if you haven't checked him out, please check out Woodworking for Mere Mortals. I think he is a fantastic builder. I think he is a fantastic woodworker, and he makes great content that I show my students constantly. In closing, I want to make sure that we are focused on creativity and making projects that last a long time and that are worth what is being charged for them. Eventually, I hope that my students can use the skills that they have to either save money or make money. So, what's the better way? What is the absolute best way to save money or make money? And that starts with being creative and creating something, creating a project plan, creating a plan for renovation. It starts with that creative process. Once students nail that creative process, those measurements, those basic skills before the project even starts, if they nail that, they will have a successful career for sure. I want to thank you guys for listening. I apologize if my voice sounds a little froggy again. The smoke is horrible out there. My prayers for those of you guys that may be affected by these fires. It's horrible. You know, my grandma still lives in the mountains above San Jose, and she was faced with the same thing. You know, so my thoughts thoughts and prayers are out there with everyone. I would encourage people to make donations or even help out if they have the ability to. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate every single one of you listening. I should probably set up like a Twitter account or something. I think I'm going to do that. Call it Chip Happens or something. I don't know. Something like that. All right, guys. I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you. I will catch you guys next week. This has been an episode of the Chip Happens podcast. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you next week with another exciting episode.